So let's go to the Fox News coverage of this first, because of course they're the ones that are going to go as most hard at these protesters in the story, because these aren't their constituents. Let's listen. And I'm telling you, Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN aren't much different.
6 U.S. Capitol Police officers hurt in a violent pro-Palestinian protest outside the DNC headquarters in Washington. Democrat lawmakers had to be evacuated, and House offices went on lockdown.
I wondered if I could get your reaction to what we saw happening at the DNC this evening with protesters.
Yeah, I haven't really seen it because I've been so busy with keeping the government open and getting NDAA done. So I'll have to comment tomorrow. Yes.
But just to follow up on that, 6 U.S. Capitol Police officers were injured this evening.
I'm not going to comment till I see the details.
Former Georgia Congressman and Iraq War veteran Doug Collins joins us now. Doug, what do you think about this level of violence outside the DNC?
Violence? Are you saying violence? Nobody else is covering violence. I mean, if anything else, if this had been anything else besides pro-Hamas demonstrators, which is just, in and of itself is amazing to me. Democratic lawmakers will be on the front steps of the Capitol.
He's amazed people are protesting in favor of Palestinians.
This is just really sad when you see Chuck Schumer basically avoiding questions where his own members and House members were having to be locked down because of this kind of violence. Don't tell me this was mostly peaceful. This is not mostly peaceful. These people are not here to have a mostly peaceful protest. And it's sad that Chuck Schumer just won't come out and say that.
But why? I mean, Chuck Schumer is one of the most pro-Israel voices in Congress. If not him, Doug, then who?
Yeah, I don't know. And that is sad because he is one of those voices that you would look to at this dude would say something. But maybe it's just, you're just baffled by this because, I mean, this is something that should be easily condemned and he won't do it. I mean, you don't know if that's still the forces of the pro-Hamas, and the other side ceasefire group that is in Washington right now influence on the Democratic Party. Maybe that's why he's not talking about it. But it is sort of strange that he wouldn't even say anything about it last night.
Yeah, well, there was a March for Israel that took place the day before this happened.
Listen to this.
300,000 people strong. It was a very peaceful and beautiful event.
300,000
people
strong.
See what's going on your screen right here were 6 police.
That's laughable. That's laughable. The one that was for Palestine had almost 3 times the amount of people, and they said that was 100,000 people. But somehow, and you literally just put the pictures next to each other. Clowns.
Police officers were hurt. There's a big difference in the mood and how the two sides are behaving with this regard. Doug, we also want to ask you about this brand new Fox polling that shows Donald Trump way in the lead on the Republican side.
So now let's go to the next video. Here is CNN's clip.
Violent protests outside the Democratic National Committee's Washington headquarters, forcing top House Democrats to be evacuated from the building. The demonstration calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. It escalated rapidly, with protesters shoving police and grabbing onto metal barricades as officers moved to make arrests.
Protesters shoving police. Good thing we have the receipts. Like, now you understand why cable news and just corporate media has a approval rating, I think it's in the 20s or 30s. People don't trust you. You have a trust rating of, I think, a trust approval rating of, I think, in the 30s too. 32, I think was the number, which tied with the lowest since 2016. We have the footage. Just think if we were to just go off of what they're saying.
Violent protests outside the Democratic National Committee's Washington headquarters, forcing top House Democrats to be evacuated from the building. The demonstration calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. It escalated rapidly, with protesters shoving police and grabbing onto metal barricades as officers moved to make arrests. About 10 members of Congress, including House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries, House Democratic Whip Catherine.
He says as police are shoving protesters, while on the screen there's police shoving protesters. He's saying protesters are shoving police. Excuse me, I misspoke. Protesters are shoving police, but the video footage right behind him is showing police shoving protesters. Isn't that ironic?
Catherine Clark and number 3 Democrat Pete Aguilar were all inside before being escorted from the area. CNN's Gabe Cohen joins us now. Gabe, this looked like it was getting out of control last night. What more do we know this morning?
Yeah, I mean, Phil, you can see from the video just how intense this clash was outside the DNC headquarters between Capitol Police and around 150 protesters from these progressive Jewish organizations that for weeks now have been leading these ceasefire protests across the country. And look, organizers told me they had planned to block entrances to the DNC building, and they wanted to force those Democratic members of Congress, including the leadership, the names you mentioned, Jeffries, Clark, and Aguilar, to walk out in front of them and be confronted by protesters with chants. And
You see, that was the whole point. And like I said before, right in the beginning of the segment, and the DNC Democrats are not going to have that. They've been getting protested by over war for the last year. You think they haven't taken lesson from the protests of AOC, the protests of Pramila Jayapal, of Ayanna Pressley, of Elizabeth Warren, of Hakeem Jeffries? And I think he was there, but they were protesting Jamal Bowman in that video. They're not gonna have that video, that photo op, for people to put out that they're against or for this genocide. So instead, get the police to clear them out. And like Nina Turner said, they didn't just show up out of the blue. They had to be called.
And with calls for a ceasefire in Gaza, but this scene really intensified. It blew up before we even got to that point, and those members of Congress had to be urgently evacuated from the building. And you can see why these physical altercations between police and protesters, those protesters in many cases locked arm in arm in front of the building, being pried away from it. And now the two sides, police and these protest groups, are really pointing fingers at each other, blaming the other for escalating the situation. Capitol Police tweeting overnight saying 6 officers were treated for injuries ranging from minor cuts to being pepper sprayed to being punched. One person had to be arrested for assault on an officer, and they write, quote,
so, and this is the title on many stories, especially on Fox News. Police officers hurt, and everybody's supposed to be in a panic. And then you hear, how are they hurt? 6 officers were treated for injuries ranging from minor cuts. So we're supposed to get up in arms about grown adults having minor cuts on their hands in a job where they have to be physical. That's what we're supposed to be get up in arms about. To being pepper sprayed. You mean by your own officer? The pepper spray was brought by you guys and used by you. And just because another officer is out here pepper spraying willy-nilly, you see how even CNN is framing it as protesters bad, protesters violent. One person had to be arrested for assault on a police officer. I would like to see that video on what you describe as an assault. We appreciate our officers who kept these illegal and violent protesters back. This is about messaging. 6 officers hurt is about messaging, about painting these protests as violent. We clearly had the receipts showing this protest was not violent. The police come in, they instigate, then they have their PR arm come in and make them out to be the victims and put out some bullshit talking about 6 officers injured.
We appreciate our officers who kept these illegal and violent protesters back and protected everyone in the area. Now, the protest groups telling a very different story. A statement from one of those groups, If Not Now, reads, quote, protesters non-violently blocked one entrance to the DNC headquarters. Police violently attacked them, causing over 90 injuries, including being pepper sprayed, minor cuts, and dragged by the hair. And look, Phil, to give you a little context here, these progressive groups, If Not Now, as well as Jewish Voice for Peace, as I mentioned, they've been organizing these ceasefire protests for weeks now. We've seen them shut down Grand Central Station in New York. They've blocked entrances to the White House. They've occupied the rotunda in a building on Capitol Hill. Hundreds of them have been arrested, but having talked to many of these organizers and witnessed these protests up close, those arrests were always part of the plan. It was supposed to be peaceful civil disobedience. We have not seen any clashes like this up to this point. And we know it came
It's a
one day
DNC.
after the March for Israel, that massive rally in downtown Washington. So we're seeing, obviously, rhetoric escalating on both sides here, leading to what we saw last night.
No, that was just police doing what they do, which is be violent against workers. That's what the police do. That's all we saw. That's it. Let me take this one down. I have one more here, and then we're gonna go through our 5-minute segment stories, and it's got a bunch of quick hitters, and then we got the Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens interview. Let's see if my daughter has a minimum day today. What? Oh, she hasn't answered yet. So I'll wait. All right, so let's get to this one here. This is the same story covered in a 2-minute clip, 2.5-minute clip on MSNBC. We saw the Fox News coverage, just showed you the CNN. Now we're watching MSNBC.
Back here at home, at least one person was arrested during a pro-Palestinian protest outside the Democratic National Committee headquarters. It was a wild scene last night. U.S. Capitol Police were there. They clashed with demonstrators. At least 6 officers suffered minor injuries. Protest organizers say at least 100 participants were injured after being pepper sprayed and pushed by police. The group was calling for a ceasefire in the war as scores of Democratic representatives and candidates were inside the building for a campaign reception. Protesters say they wanted to block the entrances and exits to force the politicians to listen to them. Capitol Police posted on social media claiming about 150 people were, quote, illegally and violently protesting. Organizers dispute that claim, telling the
illegally and violently protesting. How do you violently protest? Protesting. You got a sign and you're like, well, how do you violently protest? So the DNC is quite fine with using Capitol Police to paint a picture. This is their own constituency. I can't see this going well for the Democratic
in the
Party.
Washington Post, they had just locked arms when police responded with, quote, brute force.
You know, Willie,
leadership was in there, Hakeem Jeffries and others in there, exits and entrance blocked by the
well, and the police, DC police were prepared for this because those same people had those same violent protests when Assad killed 500,000 Arabs during the Civil War, and also when tens of thousands of Palestinians were killed by Assad. Those same protests, of course, taking place outside the DNC.
So you see what what he's doing here is connecting one propaganda story to another. In his mind, he's connecting a much worse propaganda story to this one, so that the non-informed person watching this either consciously or unconsciously has a connection, making this worse. This is Assad-like. Just terrible. It's a wonder. I mean, do the Democrats really wonder why their polling is tanking around Joe Biden and their support with young voters? Like, are they really wondering?
Word from our DNC correspondent. That didn't happen, Willie.
No.
That didn't happen. And how fascinating that the only time we see these protests are after Jews get slaughtered and Jews are trying to defend themselves against the worst attack since the Holocaust. But they have the nerve to act self-righteous when they sat in silence as 500,000 Arabs were slaughtered, including tens of thousands of Palestinians by Assad. You see, it's okay for them. They're fine when Palestinians are slaughtered by Arab leaders. It's just when Jews try to defend themselves, suddenly it's a war crime, and suddenly they're getting self-righteous. It's kind of sickening.
Yeah, we're seeing it at the DNC. We're seeing it on college campuses.
This is not going to end well for the Democratic Party. They're going after their own constituency, and it's almost like they don't recognize that that's actually what they're doing. But hey,